Good evening, everyone. We're just giving folks a couple minutes to join the presentation, so just sit tight and we'll get started very soon. Hey there, everyone. We're just letting folks join for a moment or two. We'll get started with the presentation very soon. All right, so people are still joining. Now we're at 6:32, so we will get started. Good evening and welcome to Milwaukee Public Library. My name is Kelly, the library's adult programming coordinator, and my co-host this evening is Beth, adult services librarian at East Branch Library. Tonight we are very pleased to welcome Melinda Myers, a nationally known gardening expert, TV and radio host, and author and columnist. Melinda has over 30 years of horticulture experience and has written over 20 gardening books. This workshop is the first in a series of programs featuring Melinda and partnering with MMSD over the next few months, and we're so excited to get started with the spring season. So we will have time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions or comments, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A, which you can see on the bottom of your screen. There's also a chat feature which you can use to converse with each other during the presentation this evening. With that, I will hand it over to Melinda.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm so glad to be here, and it's great to talk gardening. Spring is around the corner, even though it may not feel that way wherever you live. It's been a crazy winter, I think, for everyone. So how to plan your rain garden. Hopefully, some of you may be planning your first one, or maybe you're adding to it after last year or the year before. I always like to thank the sponsors, Fresh Coast Guardians, which is a great resource center, and you'll see links in your handout to a lot of the resources on their webpage. They're people that are trying to help us. Their resources are helping everyday people and businesses make a difference by keeping water where it falls. And then Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, Partners for a Cleaner Environment, that manage the water so that we have clean drinking water. And of course, Milwaukee Public Library for hosting this webinar. The libraries are near and dear to my heart. When I started my career many years ago, I would speak to the preschool parents during the story hour for the preschoolers. And so that's where I really started speaking. And I always say, I thank those kids, the little ones who were with mom in my audience. They taught me to speak loud and not be offended if someone started crying. But anyway, the library is such a great resource for all of us. And I want to thank them for hosting the event. Well, you probably know the benefits, but I always think it's worth repeating the benefits of a rain garden. One is they're beautiful. And we're going to talk about planning for beauty and maintenance today. And next week, we're going to talk about selecting plants to really create that beautiful garden. Just because it's a functional garden doesn't mean it can't be beautiful as well. Rain gardens are designed to keep water where it falls. So capturing water that runs off our roofs, the walks, the drives, your lawn, and capturing it so the plants benefit, so the water stays on your property. And that way it doesn't overflow from your landscape across the walk and into the street. It keeps water on the landscape where it can do some good. It reduces the risk of basement backups. And in your handout, there's a link to the Rain Check program from MMSD. And they've got other ways you can help reduce basement backups and protect all your goods in your basement from flooding and damage. So check that out as well. There's a link. And even if you're not in the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District area, there's helpful tips that'll help keep your basement dry. Rain gardens help prevent water pollution. When you think about the heavy rainfalls that we have, when it overflows and backs up the storm sewers, it then puts pollutants in our water. The chemicals, the oils on the driveway, the de-icing salt, all those materials that are on our lawn and the walks and the roof wash into the storm sewer and then eventually pollute our water. And I think one of the really nice benefits is all these plants we add, especially the natives, bring in the birds. And I don't know about you, but winter is pretty long and boring. And I leave everything stand in the winter for the birds to enjoy. And I love the color and the motion they add to my landscape. And I don't have to clean or fill it. Nature takes care of that. And then also the pollinators that we all depend upon, those that are so important in making sure we have fruits and vegetables, fiber. They're so important to our landscape and they help manage many of the pests, as do the songbirds. So we want to plan for success so that we can minimize maintenance. And that's really important because even if you like to garden, and I love to garden, but I never have enough time to do everything I want. So if we can make it easy to maintain, we're more likely to do it and get the results that we want. So select the best location. We're going to talk next week about plants for sun and shade, part sun. So definitely evaluating the light, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But you want to put your rain garden where it can capture the water from your home. You want to keep it at least 6, preferably 10 feet away from the house, but not much further, because the further away the rain garden is from your home, the more water it picks up from the lawn. And so you're going to need an even larger rain garden. You don't want it too close to your foundation because the last thing we need is more water close to the house. So we want to get the water away from our home, but we want to capture it early so we're not picking up all that extra water that would be running off the lawn. We want to avoid areas that pond. This is not a water feature. And I've been talking about rain gardens for many years now. And when I first started, people were thinking it was a water garden. But really, rain gardens are designed to capture the rainwater, but they should drain within 12 to 24 hours. If they're not draining that fast, then there's a problem with how you prepare the soil or the depth or the plant selection. So we want to make sure we plan appropriately. These kind of wet areas, we need to figure out how to manage that water. So if we move water into a rain garden, what's nice is the soil and the plant roots help remove some of those impurities I mentioned before. Keep the rain garden away from your lateral. That's the pipe that takes water from your house out to the storm sewer, out to the sewer system. And so we don't want to put our rain garden over top of that in case there's a leak or anything. The last thing we want is more water going into that lateral. Now, for a small city lot, and this was a rain garden we installed a year ago, and she was in a small city lot. So, she could only keep her rain garden a couple feet away from that lateral, but anything is good. So the city, you're going to contact the city and they're going to come out and they're going to mark that lateral for you to help you with the planning process. And as I mentioned, in a small yard, it may only be a couple feet away. Avoid putting rain gardens under trees. Tree roots are in the top 12 to 18 inches. And so you're going to need to dig down to create that pond to collect the water where your rain garden's going to be, and you'll be disturbing those tree roots. Plus, you'll have a lot of water and then dry periods, and you can really impact the health of your tree. So avoiding trees is a real plus. There are some shrubs you can include that are tolerant of wet and dry soils, but if possible, keep that rain garden away from the tree. Avoid steep slopes, steep slopes. Say that 3 times quickly. The steeper the slope, the more digging required. And once you start digging, especially if you have clay soil or a lot of rocks, you're going to appreciate having it on a more level slope. So we want the water to flow downhill. But you can see that this was from the Department of Natural Resources, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. There's a link to the manual for landscape for rain garden design, and it takes you step by step through the process. So you're going to want to get that and use use that as you plan your rain garden. But this is just an example of a steep slope, and we will need that garden to be level. So we're going to dig out deeply, and you can see the area to dig. And then we're going to create a berm to capture the water, and then that water is going to drain. And so digging and having a pond 8 inches deep, that's pretty deep and a lot of work. So we determine the depth of our rain garden based on slope, as you can see here. And the slope, if it's 4%, so this is an example of 50%, but if it's a 4% slope, it's only 3 to 5 inches deep. The more the slope, the greater the depth of the garden. Also, soil influences that as well. We want to keep, for those of you that have a septic or well, we want to keep the rain garden away from that as well. Again, we don't want to collect excess water that will impact those features in your landscape. Always call Diggers Hotline. It's a free service. If you're in Wisconsin, diggershotline.com, 811 anywhere in the country and in Wisconsin. Call at least 3 business days, so not weekends, no holidays, 3 business days before you start digging. They send all the utility companies with underground utilities in your work area out to mark the utilities. You need to make sure that they're marked so you can avoid damage. Because if you hit an underground utility, one, it could cause an injury, even death, inconvenience. Your family and your neighbors won't appreciate if you knock out the cable, and you have to pay to repair that damage if you did not call them in advance. And I don't know about you, but I'd much rather pay for plants than fixing a cable line. So for your safety, for your convenience, and to avoid any fines and penalties, call first. It's a free service, and they'll mark it so that you know where to dig and what area to avoid. Then again, we need to design our garden. It's a garden, and gardens are partly for function, but also for beauty. And you want to make sure that the garden complements your landscape. So if you have a formal area, you're going to have straight lines. If you have a more informal garden like this, you may have a curved bed or a round bed. And you're going to pick plants that the colors and the texture complement your home as well. Or maybe you prefer something more natural and you want to mimic nature like this gardener did. I think even though they have a brick Tudor home, it really looks great behind this beautiful natural setting. You want to think of what will look good with your landscape, the rest of your landscape. And we don't have to fit in with the neighborhood or comply, but we want to fit in and be a good neighbor. So you may want to think about how you manage your rain garden so you keep your neighbors happy, but create that beautiful landscape you enjoy. Now, typically a rain garden is a bed, right? Because we want to keep it away from the house and any structure. And a bed is basically an island surrounded by grass typically. And you can see this rain garden, they basically manage the slope with a retaining wall. And you could see at the end, there's the outlet directing the water into the rain garden. And so this is kind of a kidney-shaped garden. With a berm all around. So as the water comes in, it gets captured by that berm, the retaining wall on one side, and they even lit it so they could see nice at night. Maybe a teardrop shape is something you're looking for. We're going to talk about keeping the rain garden a couple feet away from walks whenever possible. So having mulch or a traditional garden the next maybe 2 feet next to that walk, because when you start digging deep, you do compromise that soil, and you want to make sure it's good and firm around the walkways. This is a beautiful garden, and you can see it's away from the house. There's a porch there, so the foundation is back by the wall of the house, not by the porch. They've got a traditional bed that connects to the rain garden. So it looks like it's connected. There's no grass to mow between the hedges and the rain garden. And they buried that inlet of water. This was the rain garden we started a couple years ago, and the homeowner decided she kind of liked maybe a bootleg shape and designed the garden accordingly. And we'll see where she put the water into this rain garden, wide along the sidewalk, and you can see it was bermed towards the back end. You want to, I mentioned extending that rain garden with traditional gardens. So if you want a front yard full of gardens, and that's what my house looked like when I lived in Milwaukee, you could have a traditional garden up along the foundation of the house and then connect your rain garden to that as well. And that's exactly what they did here. And you can't really tell where the rain garden starts and the traditional garden ends. So they really created a nice large foundation next to this. I think this is their garage. And so it was a beautiful planting filling most of their front yard, partly traditional, partly rain garden. Now, when you're designing, you want to design for maintenance. And this is not a rain garden, but I wanted to show you a few examples. So notice the gentle curves. If you have to mow around the garden, that's a lot easier than if you have a narrow corner where you have to push the mower in and pull it out. If you're the person mowing the grass, you want to make the job easy. If someone else is cutting the grass, you want to make it easy so that they'll do it, but also not damage your rain garden plants. Think about making a mowing strip around your garden. You'll see a couple of areas where people have used pavers around the edge of their rain garden. This is just an example of curbing where you can just run your mower on that curbing, so no hand trimming needed. I don't know about you, but if I have to hand trim, I'll do that. I'll do that tomorrow. And then it's another week and I'm cutting the grass, and all of a sudden that grass along the edge of the bed is 6 or 8 inches tall and it's looking a mess. Make it easy for yourself to maintain that area around the garden. And that's what this gardener did. So she has pavers defining the bed, but then she put mulch, a wider strip about 4 to 6 inches, and that way she can mow right around the edge. And you'll see some examples of rain gardens where they do have berms and some other areas that would be hard to mow, but extending it with mulch makes that easier to maintain the surrounding grass. And just another example. And just even a physical edge, like I showed you before, where you've got maybe the berm coming up, but a strong edge so the grass neatly ends before the garden begins, that you could mow right along the edge. Make sure you have easy access all around your garden, that you can get from every side to get in to weed, because keeping those weeds down is important, especially as those plants are getting started. If you need to do some watering, because we'll talk about this when you plant your garden, that first couple of years, water is really critical. Last summer in Milwaukee, we had an extended drought period, and much of the country did as well. And so if you put a rain garden in, you were doing a lot of watering to get those plants established. And of course, eventually you may need to dig and divide. So make it easy and accessible throughout. This was my house when I lived in Milwaukee, and I was one of those people that filled my front yard with gardens. And then I realized I didn't have a delicate tiptoeing through the gardens to do weeding. So I put some pathways in, and you may do the same with your rain garden. If you do an extensive large rain garden, you may want to put a few steppers in for easy access. And those steppers won't block the flow of water if you leave enough space, and will allow you to step in there so that you have easy access. Like any garden, you're going to want to make sure the views are wonderful. And we spend a lot of time inside here in the north, so fall through spring. Make sure when you're looking out in your garden from inside the house to the outside that it's a beautiful view. And then from outside, looking from the sidewalk in, you want it to look nice for you and the neighbors. You don't want to block your window so you can see out, right, to see the garden. And you want to make sure there's good visibility around that garden bed. And you can see that they use some pavers to kind of define the edge of their rain garden, and also to help form that berm to capture the water a little better. And one thing they may want to do this year is just extend that area a bit, mulch it to make mowing even easier. Or maybe they're just not as lazy as me. Put the garden where you can enjoy it. I love to sit and look at the not only flowers, but just think of all those songbirds and butterflies that come to visit your garden. Having it where you maybe have a bench nearby, or where you can sit on your front steps and you can enjoy the beauty, not only when you're weeding that garden, but when you can sit and relax as well. And you also want to think about visibility. So if your rain garden, if you live on a corner, or it's next close to your driveway, you want to make sure you have good visibility when you pull the car out of the driveway. If cars are turning at the corner, that they can see around the corner, that you've got visibility from the walkway and to the entryways as well, so people can find their way to your front door. And then be neighborly. So one of the things to keep in mind is, especially if you live in a small city lot in the city where the houses are close. My old neighborhood, my neighbor was 8 feet away from me, and we would help each other out cutting grass, and I had all my flowers, and I wanted to make sure she was happy with that garden. And one of the things I found is since I've moved, a lot of those neighbors have put in rain gardens. So it's very exciting to see. So here this person took advantage of a rain garden, one downspout off the roof, running it out to their rain garden. And one thing you may want to consider in a small city lot is perhaps you could join forces with your neighbor, and the two of you could create an even larger rain garden and manage water where it falls. Okay, so now we're going to plan, where do we put that garden? 6 to 10 feet away from the foundation of the house. Here you can see they've got a traditional garden where they've run the downspout over that to their rain garden. And we want that rain garden, the widest part, to be perpendicular to the source of water whenever possible. So think about it. When the water comes rushing in, you want a large area that can receive that water so it doesn't overflow. Now, that may not be possible. When I showed you the other kind of bootleg garden and the one previous to this, they didn't have the room to do that, but as wide as possible and whenever possible, perpendicular to the water source. If possible, have that water source enter towards the middle of the garden. Again, when we get a heavy rain and that water enters your rain garden, you want to make sure that there's plenty of space to absorb it, and a berm on the far side. And we'll see more examples of that in a minute. Now, it doesn't look like there's much of an indentation because we did a heavy mulch on this, but the water's entering through. The gravel is there to slow the velocity of the water. And then I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's worth repeating. If possible, if you can maintain a couple of feet of grass or traditional garden next to your walks, that soil is going to be more firm, hold tight to support the integrity of those walkways. And that rain garden, because we're digging deep, we are loosening the soil. And so we want to keep that back if possible from the walk and drive. Now, size. If you go through the Department of Natural Resources guide for rain gardens, and I mentioned again, there's a link on your handout, it'll take you step by step, and it will help you to determine how large of a rain garden you want to build. What influences that is the amount of water you're taking off your roof. So what drain air, what amount of roof are you trying to manage water, collect water from? What type of soil do you have? Clay soil, we'll talk about in a minute, drains slower. And that means a deeper depth and possibly a larger rain garden. And so those are some of the things to consider when you're designing it. Also maintenance, 100 to 200 square foot garden is a lot to maintain. A 10 by 10 foot is 100 square feet. So 20 by 10 feet is 200. So that's a fairly good sized garden to maintain. And starting small, you can always add another rain garden. If you get overwhelmed the first year, you may decide not to continue, and that's not a good thing. You may want to start with one downspout. So any rain garden is going to help. Any size rain garden will help. But doing one downspout at a time allows you to do smaller gardens, kind of adopt that process of designing, installing, and planting a rain garden. So one downspout at a time makes the job easier and less overwhelming. So we're going to evaluate the growing conditions. This is a woodland setting, but it was a reminder for me that we always want to look throughout the growing season and throughout the day. So if you go to work, maybe going back to work now, not working from home, or maybe you always did, it may be shaded when you leave and when you get home at night, but there was bright sunlight during the middle of the day. So check that sunlight. Think about the woodlands. There's a lot of bright sunlight in the spring before the leaves come out. You may have a large street tree that shades your property or a large shade tree in your lot. And so in the spring, there's lots of sunlight, but as those leaves emerge and they fill out and they reach full size, they're casting a lot of shade on the ground. So evaluate the sunshade patterns throughout the day and throughout the year. We're going to talk about plants for full sun. And typically when we think of plants that need full sun, we think 6 to 8 or more hours of sunlight a day. And that could be in the morning. West exposure, boy, that's a lot of hot sun. Think about the sunlight. Typically in the summer, it goes from east to west. So east exposures are like part day sun to full sun. They get a good 6 hours in the morning. It's easier sunlight, not as hot and intense. Afternoon sun, definitely look for full sun plants whenever possible. In here, the tall spiky things are liatris. There's some verbena and some other plants. There's some swamp milkweed as well. Full to part sun. So things that, as I mentioned, maybe it's an east exposure, so it's getting just a half a day of sunlight. A west exposure really is pretty intense sunlight, so full sun plants do well there. This is agastache, agastache, lavender hyssop. Wonderful pollinator plant. The leaves smell like anise. We'll talk more about that next week. A great rain garden plant that's very vigorous. And then some of you may be dealing with shade from buildings, shade from that, large shade tree or street tree. This is marsh marigold, very shade tolerant, early spring bloomer. Those bright yellow flowers just brighten things up. This was a picture, I think this is from the Berner Botanical Gardens at Whitnell Park in their bog garden. But there are some plants that tolerate those seasonally wet conditions, and this is one of them. And then the soil. This is not the glamorous part, but this is really important as you plan and create your rain garden. Your soil type influences how large your garden, the type of plants, and how deep that garden bed will be. I love this representation of soil. If you have heavy clay soil, you probably already know it drains very slowly versus the same amount of water applied to loam. Loam has equal parts of sand, silt, and clay. That's really wonderful soil that most of us don't have. And sandy soil drains very quickly. And so knowing how fast the soil drains will help influence not only the depth, but the plants you choose. Now you may want to check your soil as well. Clay soil, which you can see here, if you grab a handful and you run a ribbon through your finger and thumb, it's got it's slippery and it's like molding clay that you used as a kid, right? And then we're going to check the drainage no matter the type. If it's sandy soil, it's gritty and it doesn't hold together. It doesn't form that ribbon and stick together like clay, but we'll want to check the drainage. So we're going to dig a hole 6 to 12 inches. 12 inches makes the math easier, deep and at least 4 feet wide in the area that you're going to put your rain garden. Fill that with water and let it drain. Then fill it with water again. And in an hour, measure the depth of the water. So if it's 12 inches, in an hour, measure how much that water has drain through that hole. So if it's 1 inch, you get 1 inch of water draining per hour. And this is going to help you when you calculate the depth of your rain garden using that DNR brochure. But whether it's clay or sand, adding organic matter is going to help. So compost, you may want to use a blended planting mix, but the benefit of compost is it increases drainage in clay soil and it increases the water holding ability in sandy soil, because the goal of a rain garden is to capture rainwater, but then drain again in 12 to 24 hours. But with sandy soils, we don't want it draining so quick that you're out there watering your rain garden. So we want it to hold some moisture for the value of plants, but we want it to drain so you don't have standing water. Compost is wonderful because it adds that organic matter that improves not only drainage and water holding ability, but research found that compost improves plant growth and health. It provides some minor nutrients that the plants need to survive, but they found that plants growing in soil amended with compost have fewer insect and disease problems and in general are much healthier. A soil test is always a good place to start. Your university extension service, most of them have a soil testing lab. If not, they can recommend a certified soil testing lab. And they'll tell you the organic matter, they guesstimate the nitrogen. They can't really read that level, but they'll look at the plants you're growing, tell you what kind of fertilizers needed. The phosphorus is good for root development, flowering, and fruiting. Nitrogen is good for general growth, and potassium is good for hardiness and disease resistance. Most of our soils in urban areas across the country are high to excessive in phosphorus and potassium. We can't get it out of the soil. We just don't need to add more. And again, this is where compost pays off. We want to make sure our plants are hardy to the area. This is the USDA plant hardiness zone map. And I know with climate changing, we're seeing a lot of extremes. Last summer, a lot of us experienced drought and extreme heat. The year before, a lot of rain. This past summer was dry. So depending on where you live, but hardiness is the average minimum winter temperature in your area. And that can change. Last year, we had some cold temperatures in southeast Wisconsin. We had below zero and high 40s. And so we've had very fluctuating temperatures this year. But this is at least a place to start. If the plants are hardy to the average minimum winter temperature, they're likely to survive. And then if you live in an area with snow and ice, you want to keep in mind that you don't want your rain garden exposed to de-icing salt. You don't want it in an area where that snow gets shoveled onto it. This was my city lot in Milwaukee, and I was at the bottom of a hill, and I'd always shovel my sidewalk. But by the time everybody else's melted and it froze, I always ended up with ice. I tried to minimize the use. I used plant-friendly de-icing salt, but as you can see, I was in an urban area, a lot of salt spray from the road. So anything we can do, never shovel snow into your rain garden, because even if you don't add de-icing salt, it may be spraying in from the street. So plan your rain garden so that isn't the spot where snow gets piled and stored over winter. And when we're selecting our plants, we're going to look for seasonal interest. And this is so important no matter where you live. It's not just about when those plants are flowering. Do they have seed heads that last throughout the winter that not only add beauty, but feed the birds? Do they support the pollinators? Do they have fall color? A lot of our perennials have fall color, even if they're not blooming in the fall. So we're going to talk about plants that provide seasonal interest next week, sorry. And then winter interest. We want to leave our plants stand for winter because they're homes for the pollinators. They add beauty to the landscape. Many have seeds for the birds. So we want to make sure we have plenty of plants that not only provide beauty for us to enjoy, but food and habitat for songbirds and pollinators and other beneficial insects. So as we're selecting plants, and some of you may be already buying and selecting your plants, and next week we'll talk more about it, you want things that bloom in the spring like wild columbine, a great hummingbird plant, a great plant that welcomes spring and reminds us we got through another winter. Summer bloomers like this butterfly weed in the front, that beautiful orange, great for monarch caterpillars and other hummingbirds and pollinators and butterflies that nectar on the flowers, and monarda in the back, wild bergamot. And then fall, asters and goldenrod are great ways to end the season. Not only for us, it's that last hurrah of the season, but for the pollinators that need that nectar or that pollen to get them through their migration or before they hibernate. Now you're thinking, oh, that's so much to deal with. I got enough to figure out where to put the rain garden. How am I going to put all these plants together? Fresh Coast Guardians on their website has several different sample garden plans, different sizes. And as you can see, this one is for 100 square feet, full to partial sun. And they give you plants that have some spring and summer bloomers and fall bloomers, but then also grasses that add texture as well. And so they not only tell you where to lay them out, but how many you need to buy to make the job easier. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with starting with a sample garden plan. And as you gain experience, you can create your own garden plans or amend these to fit your needs. But it gives you that starting point. And sometimes that's all we need to make our plans. So when you've got that, you're going to mark that garden bed. And we're going to talk more about this when we plant our garden, but you want to test that design. So you want to go out once you design your garden and you have a plan, you want to test that, mark out that garden bed. I like using a rope, an old hose. I had an old extension cord, and we just marked out the garden bed. And that makes it easy so you can kind of adjust. You'll know where your utilities are, where your lateral is, you're keeping away from the walk, the size you need, and you can adjust just as needed. And this is the easy place. And if you're like, wow, that design is not working, that shape isn't good, you can change it on paper. You can repaint, remark that, move that cord. It's easier to change and test your design that way. And keep in mind, you're going to be continually adjusting your design throughout the whole process. And the other thing you're going to want to do is plan for that excess soil and sod. Sometimes we don't think about it, but when we're digging that landscape and we've got all of this soil, what are we going to do with it? And then if you've removed sod because you had grass growing there, that's something else to manage. So maybe you use it to fill some of those low spots. That's an option. Maybe you fill those low spots and you reseed, or maybe some of those areas where the grass isn't doing well, you put the sod there. Maybe use that excess soil or sod to change the grade around your house, because you want your house to grade, the soil to grade away from the foundation to avoid water flowing into the basement. And often our soil around that foundation planting has settled, and this is a great way to fix it. While you create your rain garden, you can fix problems with grading. You may want to compost it if it's sod, green side down, or the soil as well. I like to make planting beds. I have sandy soil where I live now, and I'm always starting new beds by removing the sod, and then I turn it green side down to create raised garden beds in my vegetable garden. So those of you that know me know I'm a huge fan of Milorganite, the byproduct of the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, been around over 90 years. It's low nitrogen and slow release. And so we put one layer of sod down, sprinkled some Milorganite, because the goal is to get this to break down over winter, and another layer over that, and sometimes a third layer to create those raised bed gardens. And then I covered with plastic to get it cooking over winter so it was ready to plant in spring. So I found that a great way to create raised bed gardens, put that sod to work. I didn't need any grass anywhere, but I did need to create these raised beds. So I didn't have to buy soil. I just moved it from one area to another. Or a lot of people will share it with their neighbors. But one caution, if you've got jumping worms on your property, you don't want to share that sod. You want to dispose of it properly. So jumping worms, and hopefully you don't know what they are because you don't have them, but if you have jumping worms, these are voracious organic matter eating worms. They're not native here. They can grow, they're often called snake worms too. They can grow, 8 inches long. They're called jumping worms because when you pick them up, they kind of go crazy in your hand and they jump around. Even if you grab them, their tail will break off and then they can escape. The problem with jumping worms is they eat so much organic matter. They change the structure of the soil, making it difficult to garden. And what's even more important is if they get into our natural woodlands or prairie lands, they'll change the structure of the soil and damage it so our native plants can't grow. They spread by people sharing plants, moving soil. If you buy compost or mulch, ask your provider how they manage for jumping worms. So we don't want to share the sod if jumping worms are a problem, because the jumping worm cocoons and eggs that we can't really see will go along with the sod. This was a project I did last fall, and I just wanted to walk through the process with you just because I think it will help you as you're planning your rain garden. So this was a project I did with a company, Xylem, and Fresh Coast Guardians and Cream City Conservation Corps helped do the installation. And so thanks to Fresh Coast Guardians, they were checking my math. I wanted to make sure we did it right. So we decided to take the water off a quarter of this large building. It was an apartment building. And as you can see, the downspout was not connected at this time. There was a large grassy area in between the buildings. And so we wanted to put it at least 10 feet away and maintain that area. Now, the first clue, we had a couple of challenges here. So we called Diggers Hotline. They came out and you can see we have an electric line running right at the edge of the existing flower bed. You notice the downspout was off the building. And I'm guessing what may have happened is whoever was maintaining the grass kept moving the downspout out of the way in the extension, and it ended up being disconnected from the building. So that was part of the process we needed to fix. So 2 challenges: reattach the downspout, run the water away from the building, but we also had an electric line we needed to avoid. So I went and measured that building. We just measured the garden area. We decided we were running about 700 square feet of roof, the water off of that area. So we needed about 180 square foot of rain garden to manage that water. We wanted it to be 10 feet away from the building. The other thing is you can kind of see here, we've got slopes coming down from the building, not too steep, but I wanted to take advantage of the water running down there. Some of the water from the other buildings were running out in other directions. So mainly concerned with water from this building coming to that area. Because I was by myself, I had stakes and rope going, and trying to judge that, remeasuring, making sure the bed was large enough. Then I used landscape paint to mark that edge of that bed. And then you could see I had to readjust as I did my first measurement, and kind of free-handed. I went, oops, got a little bit of an adjustment. And that's one of the joys of using paint and rope, and you can adjust it. Take a step back, look at what you're doing. Again, this is an ongoing process. We had a plan, we had the plants, but everything gets adjusted over time. You can see I marked the area coming from the downspout, where the downspout will be attached to the rain garden, aiming for the center of that rain garden. So here we go, just a close up. I did end up adjusting it a bit to line up better with the downspout. You can see it probably needed to move over about 6 or 8 inches where it would be connected to the downspout above. So again, it's always about fine tuning as you go. Because there was a maintenance crew and we needed to make mowing the grass easy so it would happen, we decided to bury that flexible drain pipe. We decided that would be much easier to have sod growing over it. It would be out of sight, away from harm from the mower or people or anything else. You can see the soil was pretty tough. We did hire a landscape company to come and help us with excavating the major portion of the rain garden, because we needed to go about 8 inches deep. And that's something to consider because it is a lot of work. So if you're doing a large garden, heavy soil, either enlist help from friends to make the job easier, or you might even want to contact a landscape contractor to assist in that part of the gardening. We use pickaxes, as you can see, to dig that trench. We had to make sure there was a slope, that we honored the slope going from the building into the rain garden. And here's just a better picture of that and a little bit better angle to show you that we did that. We kept the sod, set it to the side so we could reuse it, and I'll show you that in a minute. You could see we were collecting soil as we went because we did use some of that to backfill over the drain tile. I was involved in the digging process, so I didn't get all the pictures I wanted, including when we finally buried that underground drain pipe. Here's where it came out. Notice we have a cap on it so that animals couldn't crawl in, die, and plug it up. We wanted to make that a permanent option. We use gravel to hold it in place. And again, so if we've got runoff from the lawn area coming down, it doesn't wash out the soil. And then larger stones near the base. And I have to tell you, all those stones came out from the area we dug. So we had clay and rock to deal with. And we wanted to slow the water down because in a heavy rain, that's a lot of water coming off of the roof down through that drainage pipe and into the rain garden. So we wanted to slow the velocity to avoid erosion. This is not in the garden, but we had such heavy soil that was compacted that we needed to do vertical mulching. And so in that garden bed itself, we took an auger bit, we took an auger bit attached to our cordless drill. I brought every drill I had and every auger bit. And in that garden bed, we drilled holes. We helped to combine that compost. We dug the compost into that to amend the soil, but then we used the auger bit to create openings for the drainage to flow. So sometimes if you've got heavy soil, it had been compacted. It was very compacted soil from all the construction when they built the heavy clay soil. We amended it the best we could, but we found that that vertical mulching really was essential to aerate the soil and create the opening before we did the planting. You can see that we put the sod back over that underground drainage pipe. And that's our finished garden. But we weren't done because we had to go back and attach the downspout. So that portion of the downspout that had been ripped off the building, we reattached it to the wall, to the upper part of the downspout. You can see that drainage pipe, we ran it above ground through the garden bed, and the downspout ended about 8 inches above the ground. So we just used cement blocks, one to anchor that drain pipe in place, but to elevate it and to maintain that flow away from the building. We went through the garden bed. So the goal is they'll plant a few more plants around there to mask that view until the place we went past the electric line that required 18 inches and then improve the view. You can see we added some larger stones, again, that we found when we were digging to help hold that drain pipe in place where it entered into the trench that we dug. So a few just challenges, but in the end, we were trying to maintain that slope to run the water away from the building and make it easier to maintain the grass around. You can see we popped that sod right back in place. The good news is we had installed this when it was dry. We'd watered that area to make digging easier. So we watered a few days in advance. So if you're creating your rain garden when it's a dry period, do a good thorough soaking water to then make it easier for dig. You want the soil moist but crumbly, not soggy, wet, or bone dry. And then, so that gave it a couple days to dry. We got everything installed and we had heavy rains for about a week and the rain garden worked. So we were relieved. I want to just mention the upcoming webinars. How to select rain garden plants is next week. And then on April 5th, I'll give you some more ideas of how to manage water where it falls, keeping stormwater on your property to help your landscape, help improve water quality. So things beyond rain gardens, rain barrels, a healthy lawn, good gardens, all those things that help to hold water and keep it on your property. And then on May 12th, we'll talk about how to get those plants in the garden. For those of you in the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, the rain garden plant sale is on now through April 12th. There are limited supplies, so I recommend you start looking, start getting your order together. You may want to wait until after next week, or at least next week, I'll talk about how to arrange those plants, the plants, what they're going to provide, and give you some other clues on selection. If you're not in the MMSD district, we're going to talk about native plants that are good at managing water where it falls. And more of these are available through garden centers and garden catalogs. I want to encourage you to stay connected. My website, melindamyers.com. I announce upcoming webinars and appearances, just like this one, Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, YouTube, in the Instagram. I'm trying to catch up, but want to stay connected with you and help you be successful and have fun in your garden. And then help me grow a gardener or two. Someone inspired you to get started, whether it's to improve the environment, be eco-friendly, or grow beautiful gardens for you and the pollinators and birds to enjoy. This is my house where I live now. I have rocks and sand, and this is my grandson, Sammy, who loves to dig. So he and I created a dry river bed right off my garage. I just had a small area, and it doesn't flood often because I do have sandy soil, but I wanted to create a dry river bed. So he and I dug a trench, lined it with weed barrier, and put in the gravel. He's my digger, so getting him out there gardening is good for our mind, body, and spirit. Kids are more focused. They do better in school. Girls are less subject to peer pressure when they're exposed to when they grow up in a landscape environment. And you all know how good you feel when you get out and dig and weed and watch those beautiful gardens grow and listen to the birds that visit the landscape. So help me grow gardeners, whether it's a youngster in your life, a young family down the street, or a new retiree just starting to garden. And once again, I want to thank Fresh Coast Guardians and Milwaukee Metro Sewage District. MMSD really works at trying to manage floodwater and stormwater and provide us with good, clean water. Fresh Coast Guardians have a resource center to help create green infrastructure to manage water where it falls. And you can be part of Fresh Coast Guardians because it's really made up of everyday people that want to protect our lakes and rivers and waterways. So please join in and visit Fresh Coast Guardians and tell them why you love Lake Michigan and Wisconsin or wherever you live. What's your why? Why are you making a difference? And then I've finished on time. I'm going to turn it back to, I know Beth and Kelly have been monitoring questions, and so I am happy to answer your questions, and hopefully we can get you started with planning your rain garden.
Thank you so much, Melinda. We learned so much today. And just for everyone, just so you know, the webinar is being recorded, so we'll share the link to that within a couple of days after the presentation, along with the handout that Melinda shared this evening. So our first question in the Q&A, can a rain garden near a wet area of my yard help drain the wet area?
Yes, so what we don't want is it in the standing water. So what rain garden will do is if the water is draining and it tends to stay wet there longer, creating a water garden or a rain garden, I'm sorry, especially not right under it, but where the water can drain to it is definitely a solution. If you have ponding areas where the water ponds, that's going to be hard to manage. So you may want to do a French drain or something like that to manage those kind of situations. Build your rain gardens in other areas where you can maybe capture some of the water that's contributing to that wet area that's ponding.
Okay, this next question's a little bit longer. Jeannie says, I'm in a rural area with approximately 300-foot sloping, about 5% down to the house, which is raised about 6 feet with a 50-foot slope toward the first slope. I'm thinking the rain garden should be about 8 feet between the two slopes. Any ideas or suggestions?
Okay, so it sounds like there's a slope away from your house and towards your house, and there's a low spot. Is that how? Maybe read that one more time,
Sure. Yeah, that was a mouthful.
Okay,
so
I'm taking notes this time. Okay.
All right, here we go. I'm in a rural area with approximately 300 feet sloping about 5% down to the house, which is raised about 6 feet with a 50-foot slope toward the first slope. I'm thinking the rain garden should be about 8 feet between the two slopes. Any ideas or suggestions?
Okay. It sounds like, so I think I'm understanding that there's a slope here and a slope here. If the water, that would be an area to do that, I think is what I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, she shared, think of a V-shaped slope.
Okay, that's okay. And in that bottom part, if the water is not ponding, but you get drainage that way, yes, that would make the most sense. You may want to direct, I mean, you have no choice, it sounds like, if there's a V shape all around your house. You might want to start also capturing water off of some of your other downspouts if they're not contributing to that, and maybe start there first, because that might be easier. If that area isn't ponding, it sounds like you have decent drainage and enough space. I think you would be okay. What I would suggest, and here's what, if you can send me I know if you're in the MMS, I'm guessing you're not in MMSD. So here's what I'd like you to do. If you can send to info@melindamyers.com, if you have any pictures you could share, and kind of that description again, and then let me take a look at it. I want to make sure I'm understanding right. And then, does water collect there, or is it just a low spot, but it drains well? And do you have clay or sandy soil? I live out in the country now, and I have sand, pure sand. It's almost like brown sugar. So I have really good drainage. So I'm very lucky. So I amend my soil to hold the moisture. I don't have very few places does water pond, even when we have a lot of rain. So I need to know is, does water collect there? What's your soil type? And if you have a couple pictures or just even a sketch that you could, take a picture or scan and send to me, info@melindamyers.com. Let me take a look at it. I want to make sure I'm giving you solid advice.
And that email address is in the chat if anyone would like to write that down. All right, our next question is from Heather. Is there an ideal time of year to perform a soil test?
Good question. I meant to say that, Heather, so thanks for asking. So you can take a soil test anytime the ground is not frozen. I like to do it either in the fall, at the end of the season, if you have not fertilized, as soon as the soil is workable in the spring. It's usually about 2 weeks by getting the results. And when you take that soil test, think of, this is the Wisconsin version, the W, but you're going to want to take, go 4 to 6 inches deep. If you have, go underground, 4 to 6, a slice, 4 to 6 inches deep, remove any mulch if it's in an area that's already flower bed, remove the sod, don't want to send the grass in there, take it at the corners and then like the shape of a W through the middle. So if you're doing, let's say, the front right quadrant of your land or the area where you think you're going to put your rain garden, take that soil sample there. Because if you've ever gardened, dug holes or put gardens in your landscape, the soil can vary greatly. When I lived in the city, I had a small city lot, but I'll tell you, I had heavy clay deposits in some areas where there was decent soil. And so it really varied. And so by taking that soil test where you're going to place that garden, it's going to tell you exactly what you need, or pretty much give you a good idea of what you need to do for that garden bed. You don't need to take a soil test every year, just every 3 to 5 years when problems develop or when starting a new garden like your rain garden. So I would say when you can get out there, as soon as you can get out there to work, the soil that you can dig in, and we've been getting some warm weather if you're in Wisconsin. And I was in Michigan last week working, and boy, it was 70 degrees there. So, or Maryland, it was 70, and in Michigan, it was getting up to 60. So, if the soil's thawed, you can get out there and take a test. You just don't want to take it right after you've fertilized. Otherwise, whenever it works for you, I just like to have the results before I get started.
So this question's related a bit to our previous slope question. So if a low part of the yard collects water and is slow to drain, is that not a good area to create a rain garden?
So keep in mind, we want our rain garden to drain within 12 to 24 hours. And so what you may want to do is put your rain garden closer to the house so it intercepts some of the water rather than being in the low spot where all the water. So you're trying to intercept it rather than create it. So that's going to reduce that water collecting at that lowest spot. What we don't want, some of us have those periods where water sits for weeks in the spring. That's going to be hard. You're not going to be able to amend the soil enough and grow the right kind of plants for a rain garden. But if you go between the house and that low spot, you're going to take some of that water out of the equation.
Great. Another question here. Does the garden have to be as big as 100 feet? Could I start with something smaller like 25 feet? I am new to this and 100 sounds so big.
Well, and yes, any rain garden, any size rain garden will help. Just keeping in mind that if you're pushing your downspout to that one spot, if you're taking, all that water and pushing it there, you're going to get some overflowing during heavy rainstorms. So just be prepared for that. But anything's going to help. If your downspouts come in there anyway, you're going to have water going into the lawn. So it will be overwhelmed more often than not, but you can always expand it. And yes, I know 25 square feet is, 100 square feet is 10 by 10. And yeah, that's kind of big, but you'll be amazed when you start creating that bed. So bigger is better, but anything is an improvement. So how's that? Does that make you feel better? And I get it. You're new. And here's the other thing with being a new gardener. There's probably gardeners in your neighborhood, and gardeners love to share and they love to give their advice. And they may even be willing to lend you a shovel and lend a hand digging. But it is a lot of work. When we helped install those couple of rain gardens I was helping to install, we had extra hands, and I brought some tools along to share, and Fresh Coast Guardians helped with one of them, and the Cream City Conservation Group helped with another. So more hands made it more manageable. And don't be afraid to ask for help, because we all can use it. So anything's an improvement.
Okay, Heather wants to know, I know you mentioned not starting a rain garden in an area with a tree, but when installing a rain garden, is it okay to plant a tree in the garden or in the vicinity? We're hoping to redo our very small city lot front yard. We'd like a rain garden, but also a seating area with a tree that offers shade. Could we do both?
Trees are great. One of the things we'll talk about when we talk about managing water and keeping it on your property is trees absorb a lot of water. They collect some in their canopy and reflect it back. They slow the velocity, so more of it's absorbed. So if it's possible, and I had a small city lot too, and I had so many plants that even though I didn't have a rain garden, I was able to absorb a lot of the water because I had so many plantings. So plantings will help absorb the water too. I would say, keep in mind the rain gardens. In the rain garden, you want plants that tolerate flooding and drought. And so looking for a tree that would do the same thing. And on a small city lot, it might be challenging to do just that. There are some shrubs, and I get having shade. I had a huge street tree in my front yard that shaded, and I added a serviceberry. But is it possible to maybe on one side of your property, you have the tree in the sitting area in the shade, and the other side of your walk or the other side of that front yard or where you want it is where you put your rain garden, just keeping it at a distance. If you can keep it away. And I like your idea of planting the tree after you put the rain garden in, so the tree roots will adapt to that change in the environment. So as far away as possible with accomplishing your goals. And if you have a small city lot, you want to make sure that tree not only casts shade, but doesn't overwhelm the house either. Oh, I can't.
I was muted.
Oh, okay.
There
I was
we
like,
go.
okay.
Perils of ritual programming. Okay, Barbara wants to know what should soil tests show? So looping back to our earlier question about soil testing, what do those show, and are there certain things that folks should look out for if they're having that done?
A great idea. So pH, the soil pH. So if you are in southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, our soil pHs tend to be very high or alkaline or sweet. So you do not add lime, even if you have clay soil. If your pH is below 7, it tends to be acidic. That's central northern Wisconsin, different parts of the country. So it'll tell you the pH, which influences the plants you can grow. All the plants we're going to talk about next week are pretty much, they're tolerant of our alkaline soils, and will take slightly acidic soils as well. It will tell you the percent organic matter. 5% is ideal. Most of us don't have that. It will tell you how much phosphorus and potassium. And really what that soil test, the soil scientists that review the test, you're going to tell them, I'm growing rain garden plants, a variety of native rain garden plants, creating a rain garden. And they're going to tell you what, if any, kind of nutrients you need to add, what kind of amending you'll need to do. Should you be adding compost? And And if your soil was too acidic, they would tell you if you need to lime it. If you are in Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin, you do not need to lime your soil. I just want to make that clear because liming the soil raises the pH, makes it more alkaline, and the results last for years. pH is really hard to change, so it's really about finding plants that tolerate it. But it gives you a good starting point because, and especially when you're selecting fertilizers and getting your rain garden started. Once your rain garden is in, and you've amended the soil, you really need to do very little fertilizing to keep it healthy and growing. So this is just helping you to get your plants off to a good start. And the report not only tells you what's going on, but what you do as the gardener managing that garden.
Thank you. I know we're a little bit over time here, so thank you for staying with us a bit later. Again, everyone, the email address that Melinda mentioned, info@melindamyers.com. We are recording this webinar and we'll share out that link as well as the handout that Melinda went through this evening in that email as well. So it's time for us to say good evening and goodbye for now until next week. So we just want to thank you, Melinda, for your insight and expertise this evening. Thanks to everyone, of course, who attended this evening's program. And we want to encourage you to all head to mpl.org and visit our climate change page. We've got all of these workshops coming up listed, and you can register there just as you registered for this evening's program. And we've got Climate Action Book Club that meets monthly as well, and other great offerings. So keep your eyes peeled as those come up. And thanks again for attending this evening. And thanks, Melinda, and we'll see you next week.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
All right, bye-bye.
Goodbye.